Hey everyone, today we're going to go over the potential use of laws and constitutional violations for the suppression of Christianity in the United States. First I'm going to go over Acts 17:11, and then I'm going to read from Revelation 2:8 through 11. Acts 17:11 says, "These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so." All that means is that anything that I say, you have to be careful not to believe it at face value. You have to research it for yourself. The second thing that I'm going to be reading here, Revelation 2:8 through 11, is it's Christ's note to the angel in the church in Smyrna. And it reads, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, and you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days, but be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death." And that's a letter written to a church that currently we aren't in. What you have to understand about the letters that Christ wrote to the churches is that it both applies to a church that existed at the time the note was written, and it also applies to a church that's in the future. That was the Church of Smyrna, which is referred to as the persecuted church, which is one of the ones that has nothing really all that bad said about it because they're experiencing heavy persecution in the name of the Lord. And while I don't believe we're in that time yet, I think that it's entirely possible that shortly we will be living in that time. So I wanted us to go over how, in the United States specifically, the government might use its power to abuse Christians and persecute them, although they haven't been as much currently. It's highly likely that they will be in the future. So you'll have to excuse me while I use some notes that I've written down. And if it seems like I'm reading, that's because I am. So I've written down some laws that I'm weary of because of the potential for harm that they have. I have curfew laws, demonstration permits, loitering laws, disturbance of the peace laws, stop and identify laws, COVID anti-church laws, abortion laws, the First Amendment violations that are currently very frequent, they're running rampant, and unlawful detainments. And before I carry on, I want to specify that I'm not a lawyer, and none of this is official legal advice or suggestions about what we should do, because I'm inexperienced in it. This is just me thinking about the laws and what we might be able to do to make things better. So, starting with curfew laws. The curfew laws are potentially hazardous because they could be used to stop the meetings of groups of people for one reason or another. Like, let's say I have a group of Christians that meets at 9 p.m. every Tuesday, and so the government recognizes this, and they decide that they're going to set a curfew for 8 p.m. every Tuesday, for the sole purpose of making sure that that specific demonstration doesn't take place. It's something that they've done in the past, and it's something that they'll likely do in the future. Demonstration permits are another thing that's a concern. A lot of different public places will require you to get a demonstration permit in order for you to have a large group of people. And I think that this is potentially hazardous because the government in the future might use it to pick and choose who they allow a demonstration permit to go to. Loitering laws are very dangerous because it's very easy for a police officer to abuse loitering laws if you're just standing in one place for too long. And that matters because if I was demonstrating the gospel to a group of people and a police officer wanted me gone, they might use loitering laws to remove me. Disturbance of the peace laws is kind of thing where they can get you for anything vague, like if you're being too loud or preaching in a noisy way or a weird way that they're not interested in hearing, they'll just ignore you. And then they'll violate your rights because they'll arrest you and take you away. Stop and identify laws. This doesn't apply to every state, obviously, but a lot of states have stop and identify laws that are used to regulate specific groups of people. Like, for example, a lot of people complained that stop and identify laws could potentially be harmful to minority groups like different races, different sexes, and different religions. And I think that it's highly likely that that might be the case for us in the future. I also wanted to talk about what was going on during the COVID-19 pandemic, because a lot of our churches were closed at the time, and I think that that is a violation of God's law, and that although it might be the safe thing to do for a church to not meet up for a while, the government proved that it has the opinion that it has the right to remove your ability to meet at a church whenever it chooses. I also wrote down abortion laws, and I think that the most simple way to explain this is the worst way you can persecute a Christian is to kill them, and the worst way to kill somebody is to do it before they even get the chance to start living and breathing and even having thoughts of their own. So I just wanted to bring that up. Next one's First Amendment violations. While the First Amendment protects our speech, you can watch thousands of videos on YouTube, some of which I'm going to put links to in the description, for just watching the police arrest people in public for doing nothing wrong, violating their rights. Both their First Amendment and their Fourth Amendment tend to be violated at the same time, because once you practice the First Amendment in a way that those in charge don't like, tends to be that they arrest you and unlawfully seize you. And that goes into unlawful detainment, which was the last one on my list. An unlawful detainment potentially can be very harmful because they can drag you away from where you're preaching, no matter who's interested in hearing it, no matter how many people are around, they can drag you away so that you can't complete your sermon. As a side note, I wanted to bring up the Pope Blue laws. If I understand correctly, they are sets of rules that the Pope sets up for the Catholic Church, specifically for how you conduct yourself on Sunday, which is the day that Catholics go to church. But I'm going to make a whole separate video on Pope Blue laws. I also wanted to bring up the Israeli persecution of Christians, because in Israel right now, there are certain places that only the Jews are allowed to walk, certain sidewalks. They tend to abuse people of the Christian faith there in Israel. And that is because our religion differs from theirs. But that's not something that goes on in America. And here in America, there's plenty of examples of the Jews being attacked by Christians. So it goes both ways. Final one I wanted to use as a side note is chemical products in our in everything that we use, like our food, our clothes, maybe even pieces of paper. There's damaging chemicals everywhere, no matter what you're touching. And this is a form of control that they use against us, because they're trying to make us sick and unhealthy in ways that we don't even comprehend, because to us it's just normal everyday life. Another thing I wanted to bring up is the use of forums that you can access exclusively online. Like if you went to the courthouse and you asked for a form and they said that form's online, I don't have any physical copies of that. I think that there should be some sort of amendment even that ensures that any form that's online can be available as a paper copy. Because if something is available exclusively online and you don't have a home, a computer, or even a phone, you can't access those things that are online. But it seems like nowadays every courthouse and government building expects you to just go online to do your business. And while that would be inconvenient, if the government ever figured out how to use the internet and create good websites for themselves that weren't produced in 2007, some people don't have access to that, and so it's very damaging to our society. As a side note, I wrote down ways to solve the problems I brought up, because I didn't want to just bring up potential issues. I wanted to see if I could think of potential solutions to the issues, although they're very complex issues, and I'm not willing to claim that I'm even smart enough to come up with a legitimate answer for any of them, but I am willing to suggest answers for smarter people to make an attempt at looking into. The first one is just to remove these laws. The second one is to teach officers a lot more on public relations and de-escalation training. The third one is prevent the abuse of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is often used and abused, even though it's supposed to be there to protect officers. A lot of times it's used to keep bad officers in their line of work. I think that law enforcement should create an atmosphere at their departments that discourages members of law enforcement from being too aggressive, unhelpful, or willing to violate constitutional rights. A lot of things I see are police officers who are unwilling to help the public. Even when you're not doing anything wrong, a lot of them have a chip on their shoulder, and that's not to say all of them do. Like, about a week ago, I think I got pulled over and I met a really nice police officer. So it's not all of them, but there's definitely a lot of them that you can see all over the internet. One of the examples of this I'm going to use is a Long Island Audit. I'm going to put him in the description, along with a channel called LackLuster. And these are guys who kind of just go around watching footage of the police and filming footage of the police where they find abuses in separate apartments or departments, and they attempt to uncover what happened and how things could be improved. I thought that it might be a good idea if they created a department of the government that does secret First Amendment audits on public property. So it'd kind of be like an undercover cop, where all he does is goes into a public place and records or does something entirely legal, and then he sees if the officers involved try to get him in trouble at all. I think that if you're going to be a public servant, you should learn to humble yourself and use Christ as an example, because when he came down to serve the public, he was the perfect example of it. And there are plenty of law enforcement officers that are Christians, and they should be doing a better job of using Christ as an example of how to conduct themselves during public service. And for now, that's everything that I have. You can go ahead and look at those things that I have down in the description, the links to the channels. I'm also going to have links to different products. The first one is going to be a dash cam, and the second one's going to be a radar for detecting when police are scanning your vehicle. They are legal in most states. You just have to make sure it's legal in yours, in your area. And the reason I want to do that is so if you come into contact with law enforcement, you're always recording and protecting yourself. It's a good idea for us to practice that, because it's likely that while we might not live through Christian persecution in our time, our children might, and if we practice as if we could potentially be persecuted by the public, then they'll know how to conduct themselves better when it's their turn to do so. And that's all I have for you today. Have a good rest of your day.